fortune above. First, he needed hits. Thought of a fitting quotation from the play that was about to begin, as he quietly drew his medical bag from under his overcoat. Had not our babbling dreams affright our souls? Conscience is but a word that cowards use. Safely obscured on the floor behind the throne, he withdrew a leather belt and tightly cinched it around his sagging bicep. He filled the glass syringe with morphine. Only half a dose at a time, merely enough to quell the nausea. Seward knew that doping up was a gamble, but he could no longer function without the morphine. He felt the drug surge through his veins. It took only a few minutes for him to regain control of his body, and once he felt his legs were steady enough, he began his climb into the rafters. While the Ward of the Roses played itself out on the stage below with wooden swords and fake sugared blood, Seward would set the stage for the truly bloody battle. He drew his weapons from a hidden compartment in his coat. The pieces were set, and now the game was in motion. Chapter 6. It was now 20 minutes to 9. Only 2 minutes passed since Quincy last pulled on his watch fob and checked the time. Curtain was supposed to be at 8 o'clock sharp, and the audience was growing restless. Having spent time working in the theatre, Quincy was well aware of all the possible complications that could delay curtain time. Terrifying thoughts crept into his mind. What if Bazarat couldn't perform? They could be refitting Bazarat's costumes onto some poor understudy. Under usual circumstances, it was a stroke of luck for the understudy, but tonight the audience had paid to see Bazarat. Quincy had paid dearly to see Bazarat. A substitute would be most unwelcome. If the actor were unable to perform, it would all be for naught. A gentleman complained to his wife in French, a language Quincy knew well. This Bazarat is as bad as that Englishwoman, Sarah Bernhardt. I saw a performance of hers when she began almost an hour late. A Frenchman would never. Quincy was about to say something in defense of British performance when the house lights flickered off, section by section, and the theatre was plunged into blackness. Quincy expected the spotlight to appear, but nothing happened. The audience fidgeted in their seats. Still nothing happened, and Quincy strained his eyes in the hope of seeing into the darkness. Without any warning, a soft, baritone voice reverberated throughout the Colosseum-like theatre. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the Son of York. A single footlight sparked below, illuminating the pale face of Bazarat with an eerie glow from below. His piercing black eyes fixed on the audience from under his dark brows. Quincy was in awe of the impressive transformation of the handsome actor into the hideous Richard III. He was, of course, dressed all in black, his left arm withered, sporting a hump on his back. Despite the heavy costuming, his mannerism and tone left no doubt that the figure on the stage was an aristocrat. And I that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking-glass. The stage light slowly grew brighter. Quincy could see the pain in Bazarat's eyes. He was not merely reciting Shakespeare's words, but rather drawing forth the thought and meaning behind them. I have no delight to pass away the time unless to spy my shadow in the sun and descant my own deformity. Bazarat stopped, focusing his attention on one of the box seats. Quincy glanced over, immediately recognizing the dinner-jacketed woman from the lobby. Therefore, since I cannot prove a lover, I am determined to prove a villain. Bartoli was surprised to see Bazarat looking so intently in her direction. With the luminous stage lights blinding him, could he actually see her, or was it pure chance? She stared coldly back at the actor. The dark-haired woman in white whispered, "Is it he, mistress?" "It is he," an unblinking Bartoli replied. She ran her fingernails across the arm of the seat, causing tiny wood shavings to fall to the floor. She realized that the arrogant bastard was doing the unabridged version of this horrid play. Having to sit through 4 hours of this truck was going to be far more torturous than any device she had acquired from the Spanish Inquisition. The actions of the actors on the stage hit far too close to home. Ferenc Nadeshny was not an intelligent man. Elizabeth soon learned that he had no thought that originated from above the east. It was this flaw in his character that ultimately enabled her to outwit him. She lulled him into a false sense of security by pretending to enjoy his sexual sadism and violent debauchery. 3 years after they were married, in the hope of ridding herself of him forever, she had used his vanity against him and manipulated the Count into taking command personally of the Hungarian troops in the war against the Ottomans. Through victory in war, he would enhance the Nadeshny family name, she had told him, assuring him that upon his victory parade, she would change her name to Countess Nadeshny in front of her entire family. During the Count's absence, his guards had initially kept a close watch on her, but she had tricked them as well, leading them to believe she was less interested in escaping than in running the affairs of the estate. She provided assistance to the Hungarian and Slovak peasants, even medical care. There were several instances in which she interceded on behalf of destitute women, including a woman whose husband was captured by the Ottomans and a woman whose daughter was raped and impregnated. Each night, alone in her bedchamber, she secretly prayed to God for her husband's death on the battlefield. As a student of science and astronomy, Báthory had waited for the right moment. On the night of a lunar eclipse with total darkness as her ally, she had dressed in a black hooded cloak and vanished from the castle. With the assistance of the peasants whose loyalty she had bought and paid for with her husband's wealth and her own calculated generosity, Báthory escaped to find refuge with her aunt Carla. Carla was said to be a pious woman. In the safety of her aunt's home, Elizabeth had hoped at last to find the soothing love and protection of God's grace. Aunt Carla wore her dark matronly look with pride. Her clothes were crisp, blank from head to toe, except for the large gold cross around her neck. Young Báthory assumed that she was merely in mourning for one of her husbands. Aunt Carla had been married 4 times, each husband having met some horrible, inexplicable death. When Báthory arrived wearing the crimson velvet gown, instead of giving her niece a warm greeting, Aunt Carla had sneered, "Wearing bright colors is for the vain. Vanity is one of the 7 deadly sins. God would not approve." Although Aunt Carla seemed to be cold and strict in public, in private she was far kinder and gentler. She listened attentively to her niece's tale and comforted Báthory. They grew close enough for Aunt Carla to confess during a night of drinking what seemed to be gallons of wine that she had murdered her husbands because they had discovered the true reason why she refused their death. It was not because Aunt Carla was so in love with God that she took the Bible literally and believed lovemaking to be for the sole purpose of childbearing. The truth was that she gained no arousal from the male form. Aunt Carla could find satisfaction only with other women. Báthory stared at the cross around Carla's neck, shocked by this murderous hypocrisy. Yet as a result of Carla's revelation, so much of her own self that she did not understand at last became clear to her. Báthory, as a budding young lady, had played with several servant girls until discovered by her mother and scolded severely. Her parents had called in a priest to pray with their sinful daughter. Her marriage to Nadeshny came shortly thereafter. Seeing the confusion on young Báthory's beautiful face, Aunt Carla had comfortingly stroked her hair, all the while staring longingly into her ocean blue eyes. Before Báthory had known what was happening, Carla's lips were upon hers. Báthory had pushed Carla away. The idea of touching her elderly aunt in such a way seemed repulsive. Does the Bible not say that murder and those desires are sinful? Are you not sinning before God? Carla stood up, self-righteously enraged. You foolish, naive child. I could not risk any of my husband's exposing me. At best, I would have lost my wealth and been forced penniless into the wilds, my flesh branded by a hot poker with the sign of the heretic. At worst, I would have been burned alive at the stake. It was not murder, but self-preservation. You would do well not to judge me so harshly. The way I see it, you have three choices. Stay with me, love me, and I will protect you from your husband. Go to a convent and let your unparalleled beauty waste away until you become as fat, old, and wrinkled as I. Or you can go back to the brutality of navigation. The choice is yours. Bartley needed time to sort out her thoughts. But Aunt Carla was not a patient woman. She had no choice but to give in to all of her aunt's desires. Bartley had never experienced love like this. Why couldn't her husband learn to touch her this way? As she climaxed for the first time in her life, she no longer gave any thought to what she was doing and with whom she was doing it. At last, Bartley found her true self. How could something so enjoyable be called the sin against God? Was not love God's way? It was in that moment when Bartley's rebellion against God began. Bartley jolted suddenly in her seat as an actor screamed on stage. She couldn't sit for another moment of this performance. She rose. Mistress, what is it? The blonde woman in white asked. Bartley's eyes were firmly focused on the stage character of Christopher Earnscliff, the priest. I need to leave this place. What a bazar! You know what must be done. Do not fail me. Quincy had no idea what gratuitous extravagance this evening would bring. He had never seen a production of the tragedy of Richard III performed in its entirety, nor could he have ever imagined it being so spectacular. The costumes looked authentic, the scenery beautiful and grandiose. The performers were magnificent. Most wonderful of all was Bazarab, who played the Machiavellian king's conviction that for a short time Quincy forgot he was watching a performer. Bazarab made the lines sound as if they were the first words that came to his mind. Quincy had memorized the entire play years ago, but then it had only been words on the page. Now those words lived and breathed. The play soared to its climax. Bazarab's entire presence seemed so filled with remorse that Quincy truly believed he repented his evil deeds. He could feel the tragedy of the character and realized he was treating it. As King Richard, Bazarab thundered onto the stage, waving his sword. A horse! A horse, my kingdom! For a horse! Quincy's heart pounded like a war drum. He was completely unaware that he was gripping the seat in front of him so tightly that he was almost pulling the unfortunate patron who occupied it backwards. A battle cry rang out. Several actors playing soldiers sprang onto the stage to attack Bazarab, who swung his mighty sword with the deft skill and agility of a true warrior knight. Lost in the moment, Quincy was about to stand up and cheer when more soldiers appeared. It seemed that an army of 100 men was attacking King Richard. Quincy was in awe at the most stunning display of sword choreography he had ever seen. There were no words to describe the vicious reenactment of the battle that ended the Plantagenet dynasty. He gasped when Richmond plunged the sword into the king's chest. All characters on stage froze in tempo as the stage lights, with the exception of the solitary footlight, went out. Quincy knew that the death of King Richard ended the play, but he found himself frozen along with the rest of the audience. No one breathed. Bazarab stumbled and in a splendid fashion died. The audience applauded madly, so much so that Richmond's final soliloquy could not be heard. No one cheered louder than Quincy. Bazarab returned to the stage, did his final bow, and then made eye contact with the wildly applauding Quincy. The young man's heart soared. Bazarab's attention drifted over to the dinner-jacketed woman's box. It was empty. Who were those women? made Bazarab know them? When he looked back to the stage, the curtain had already descended, separating Bazarab from the adoring audience. He could not wait to meet this magnificent man face to face. There was no longer any doubt in Quincy's mind. The theater was where he belonged, not in some oppressive law firm. He needed to find the quickest way backstage to see if Bazarab had received his letter. He waited for the crowd to begin to disperse before attempting to exit to the aisle. As he started to make his way out of the road, he noticed the head usher pointing him out to Antoine, the theater manager. Antoine approached the end of the aisle, intercepting Quincy. "Allons," Antoine whispered. "Monsieur Bazarab will see you now." Chapter 7. Quincy felt like a present-day Theseus as he followed the manager through the backstage labyrinth of the opulent Dacre at Lodwell. He noticed the horses, men who now resembled centaurs as they struggled to free themselves from their elaborate costumes. Half-dressed female performers with nymph-like bodies scurried by. Antoine stopped in front of a door bearing Bazarab's name. He nodded. "Excusez-moi, Monsieur Bazarab. The young gentleman is here." There was a long moment of silence. As Quincy began to think that he would not meet Bazarab after all, a baritone voice resonated from behind the door. "Send him in." Quincy took a deep breath, swallowed his nerves, and stepped through the door. Bazarab sat in front of his makeup mirror, reading Quincy's letter. The actor did not look up, but as he continued to read, he gestured gracefully and said, "Enter, please." Obeying as quickly as possible, Quincy closed the door behind him. He looked about the spacious dressing room. A neat stack of steamer trunks towered in one corner like a small fortress. Framed posters of Bazarab's previous productions were hung symmetrically against the wall fabric. Opulent furniture decorated the room, which was far more lavish than the standard assortment of spare, unmatched chairs normally found in an actor's dressing room. An extravagant chaise lounge that looked Egyptian was sitting next to a small, elegant pedestal table that was set for tea. Bazarab kept reading. Quincy wondered if he was looking at the letter for the first time. "Forgive me, Master Harry," Bazarab said, his tone trembling. "I was quite taken by your letter. So honored, in fact, that I wanted to read it a second time very carefully." It was as if Bazarab could read his mind. Quincy said hastily, "I can't believe I'm standing in your presence. I can't explain it, but I see you, and suddenly my entire life makes sense." Quincy wondered if he could possibly have said anything more idiotic. But in his surprise, Bazarab smiled warmly. "Forgive my ill manners," Bazarab laughed. "My father would disown me. Please, sit down and join me for some tea." Quincy was almost afraid to sit on the delicate antique Egyptian chaise, but he didn't want to offend his host. He perched on its edge while Bazarab poured tea into two elegant glass teacups. Quincy carefully picked one up to study its silver-covered base and handle, engraved with the initials I.L. The teapot, cream jug, and sugar bowl all bore the same monogram. Quincy wondered who I.L. was. "Ivan Livyat," Bazarab said. Quincy gave him a startled look. Once more, the actor seemed to be reading his mind. Then he realized that he was unconsciously tracing the initials on his cup. Bazarab wasn't clairvoyant. He was a keen observer of human behavior. No doubt one of the many reasons why he was such a magnificent performer. Bazarab continued. "He was the Tsar's assay master. His initials verified that it is, in fact, silver." "Tsar?" "Yes. His tea set and the tea itself, Lapsang Shushan, was a gift from Tsar Nicholas. Enjoy." "Nazdravie," Bazarab toasted. He was about to take a drink from his cup when he realized his nose, or to be exact, Richard III's nose, was in the way. He smiled, setting the cup down. "Excuse me for a moment." As Bazarab crossed back to his dressing table, Quincy couldn't help but contemplate the odd ways of the world. day earlier, he had been imprisoned at the Sorbonne. Now, he was sipping tea, chosen by the ruler of Russia, with the most celebrated actor in Europe. I've seen you before, Master Huck, Bazarov said, pulling off the artificial nose, which had been fashioned from mortician's wax. Truly? Quincy wondered if he remembered him hanging from the statue the previous night. Was at the London Hippodrome. You were performing a one-man production of Faust. Quincy coughed so suddenly that the tea almost erupted from his nostrils. The great Bazarov had been in that small, unassuming variety theatre over a year ago. You've seen me perform? Yes. I found you quite entertaining. Very original. And that is not an easy feat in this business. I proceeded backstage to congratulate you, but found you were in the midst of an intense argument with an older gentleman. He knew exactly which night Bazarov referred to. That night, his father, Jonathan Harker, had also been in the audience. Quincy had no idea he was there until it was too late. He had tried to sneak out after the show, but his father had already found his way backstage and was yelling at the house manager. And if you think you can stand in my way, Father, please, get your things, Quincy, Jonathan barked. You will not be returning to this place. He cannot stop. What I cannot do is to allow you to pursue this avenue. You draw too much attention. On the stage, you're exposed. This is not safe. Exposed to what? I'm not a child. I can choose what I do with my life. Very well. That is your wish, fine. But if you choose this course of action, Jonathan said, coldly lowering his voice, you will have to survive like your fellow performers without any financial assistance from me. Quincy had wanted to stand his ground, but he was not yet in any financial position to meet his father's challenge. He was defeated. The silence answered his father's question. I thought as much, Jonathan barked. While you're living off my money, you will comply with my wishes. The older Harker was in no hurry, contacting old acquaintances and former colleagues to call in some outstanding favors. The following week, Quincy found himself whisked away to the Sorbonne. Quincy frowned into the exotic tea. The evening had been going swimmingly until the memory of that encounter with his father defeated him. Forcing you to study law, I assume then that your father is a solicitor himself. Pardon? Oh, yes, Quincy said as he realized he must have been speaking his thoughts aloud. Now I understand why I have not seen or heard of him since. A father wishing his son to follow in his own footsteps is far from rare. Alas, the story is as old as man's dominion in this world. Perhaps you have a sibling who is more interested in the law and can take your place. I'm an only child. No one else to share the burden. Consider yourself fortunate, Bazarov replied. You could have had a younger brother whom everyone favored. Comparisons between siblings always spark rivalry. It had never occurred to Quincy that Bazarov could have a brother, but there was barely any information in the public arena surrounding Bazarov's private life. He cleared his throat and delicately inquired, I assume your brother is not an actor. You're assuming correctly. He and I are polar opposites, Bazarov said. He gestured to the crown he had worn on stage. I dare say that King Richard and his brother had a better relationship. Nay, Cain and Abel. Quincy laughed along with Bazarov. The actor smiled. Fate certainly has a strange way of bringing people with common bonds. As he was about to take a sip of tea, a banshee wail rang from outside the door. Bazarov sprang to his feet. Someone pounded on the door, and a man's voice called out, Mr. Bazarov, save yourself! With very few people left backstage to witness them, two women in white moved silently through the hallway, stopping at the door marked with the gold star. Faces bent in predatory grins, they licked their lips as they unsheathed their scimitars. Their eyes turned black, their fangs elongated. The dark one reached for the doorknob, and the pale-haired harpy crouched like a cat waiting to pounce. Suddenly, a sandbag fell from above and hit the blonde, sending her chin into the floor. In that same instant, Seward swung down on one of the many ropes from the catwalks above. As he swooped close, he flicked a cross-edged glass bottle, spattering holy water onto the woman in white. Their skins sizzled and blistered. Their terrible wails echoed through the corridor. While the women in white ran off, wailing in pain, Seward dived toward Bazarav's door and pounded on it. "Mr. Bazarav, save yourself!" Bazarav turned to Quincy and pointed to the large steamer trunks. "For your safety, stay behind those." Quincy swiftly did as he was commanded. Screams and commotion came from outside the door. Bazarav grabbed a large steel broadsword from behind his desk. If Quincy hadn't known better, he would have sworn the blade was deadly real, not a dull prop weapon. Bazarav swung the dressing room door open, raised his sword, and leapt out, ready for a fight. But except for a few terrified stagehands, the hall seemed free of danger. The actor focused on the fallen sandbag and snapped his head up to the rafters. Looking left and right down the hall, he moved cautiously, as if he expected another attack. Could the screams and banging on the door have been only a diversionary tactic? Quincy wondered what secrets Bazarav was hiding. Seward chased the women in white along the backstage corridor and caught up to them on the stage behind the closed curtain. Seeing a shadow fall across the floor, he dropped down just as one she-devil's scimitar hummed past his head. A pale-haired demon rushed at him from the other direction. Drawing his bone-handled bowie knife from its sheath, Seward cast it at her heart. With reflexes and speed far superior to any human, the woman in white was able to dodge the blade's killer thrust so that it missed her heart and struck deep into her shoulder. The dark-haired vampire grabbed Seward about the throat, but she inadvertently touched the silver chain around his neck, which had an assortment of small religious icons dangling from its length. Hot steam leapt from her blistering hand where she touched the chain, and Seward felt a terrible bleed. The more the chain for situations such as this, the wounded pair fled, bursting through the main curtain, and Seward's pride swelled. For a moment, the weak old man had the advantage. The women in white tore through the red velvet theatre curtain and leapt from the stage into the seats, bounding like wild cats on all fours from seat top to seat top. Seward jumped from the stage, twisting his ankle as he landed. He continued the pursuit, hobbling up the theatre aisle. The head usher, whom Seward had earlier followed into the backstage area, appeared at the top of the aisle and demanded, in understandable bemusement, "Qu'est-ce qui se passe?" The pale-haired woman hurled him out of her way, smashing his body into a nearby column. As she fled, she pulled the bone-handled bowie knife out of her shoulder. Seward paused by the man for an instant. When he had determined the fellow was not too badly injured, he continued his chase. Seward stopped on the top step of the Théâtre de l'Illion's entrance. Smoke escaped from his mouth as the cold air clashed with his hot breath. Through the thick blanket of fog that had rolled into the Paris night, he could barely make out the shadowy figures of the women in white across the street. But he could see by the flickering reflection of their steel knives and gas lamps that they were waiting for him in ambush behind a monument that held a stone bust on its central pillar. This was Seward's moment at last. He caressed his beloved watch for courage. He would kill one of these demons in the name of Lucy, and the other would die in memory of the poor girl slain in Marseille. Seward drew his sword. He was God's madman again, God's soldier. With a battle cry, Seward raised his sword over his head and raced down the stone steps with surprising agility, ignoring the pain in his ankle. The two vampires watched his charge, making no effort to move. They smiled as he reached the bottom step and raced onto the Rue de Vaugirard. A horse whinnied, and Seward whirled in horror to see the error of his strategy. He had been so focused on attacking the two pawns that he had forgotten the Black Queen could attack from any direction. Out of the fog, the driverless carriage descended swiftly upon him. With no time to react, Seward was thrown down amidst trampling hooves and carriage wheels. Lying, battered and weak, he instantly knew he had not only failed the benefactor, but he had also failed God. The shame he felt was even greater than the pain in his broken body. Through stinging tears, he saw the women in white deftly catch up to the racing carriage and bound effortlessly into it. The dark-haired demon turned to laugh at him before climbing inside the coach. Seward saw his watch lying on the ground nearby. He tried to retrieve it, but when he moved, the pain was too great. He coughed up blood, fighting to scream. A man loomed over him, and Seward tried to signal the man to give him his watch. The man followed Seward's eyes and picked up the cherished timepiece. He said softly in French, "You won't need this for your kind." As life slowly ebbed away, Seward watched helplessly as the man ran away with his most prized possession. Chapter 8. Antoine hurried Quincy up through the front of the theatre, where the young man was shocked to see the mangled body of a man lying in a pool of blood on the cobblestones. Pedestrians ran, calling for police and a doctor. "My God," Quincy said. "What happened?" Whistles sounded from all directions as policemen headed for the scene. Antoine pulled Quincy down the front steps, attempting to usher him away as quickly as possible. "As I understand it, a crazed man attacked two women in the theatre." Quincy saw a vagabond leaning down to talk to the injured man on the street, and was alarmed to see him grab the victim's watch and run off. Without thinking, he yelled, "Thief!" and charged after the fellow, pushing past Antoine. It was too late. The thief had run up the street out of Quincy's range. Flustered at his lost chance at heroics, Quincy was forced to join the other mild-mannered pedestrians, pointing the thief out to the arriving policemen. Within moments, two policemen had tackled and apprehended the vagabond and retrieved the silver watch. Antoine grabbed Quincy by the arm and dragged him away. "Mr. Bazarard charged me with taking you safely back to the Sorbonne. Come with me right now, young man. This is no place for you." Like Antoine, Quincy would not dare to disobey Bazarard's wishes. As they shuffled through the crowd, he whispered, "What about Mr. Bazarard? Surely you cannot expect a famous public man like Bazarard to be seen around such a tragedy. Think of his reputation." Quincy nodded. He could not help but wonder what had really happened backstage, and why the great actor had remained behind when there could still be danger. The policemen were clearing the area now, allowing the injured man room to breathe. Quincy glanced back, finally able to glimpse the victim's face. The man seemed oddly familiar. Looking up into the night sky, Seward realized that he felt no more pain. With his last gasp, he uttered the single word, "Lucy." The driverless black carriage raced across the Seine by way of the Boulevard du Palais Bridge. The city of lights sparkled with the night. Poets have written that when those lights shine, Paris is a city for lovers. Bartori had lived long enough to know the sparkle was just an illusion, like love itself. Countess Elizabeth Bartori had become her Aunt Carla's willing student, doing anything Carla asked for fear that the instruction might end. Yet as the Countess embraced who she was and found herself at last happy, safe, and content, she realized that she might find more bliss with someone her own age, in particular Ilka, the kitchen maid. Ilka was young, beautiful, innocent, and sweet. More importantly, Ilka always spoke of the future, unlike Carla, who often dwelled on the past. With Ilka, Bartori had someone with whom to share her youthful energy, to run in the fields and seek adventures. Bartori meant no harm to her aunt, and justified the dalliance by believing in her newfound philosophy that love could never be wrong. Aunt Carla began to suspect her and confronted Ilka. Blinded by jealousy and rage, she had denounced Ilka as a thief, and saw to it that she was swiftly hanged for her crimes. When Bartori retaliated by banning Carla from her bed, her aunt betrayed Bartori's whereabouts to her family. Days later, alarmed escort arrived. When Bartoli resisted, she was bound, gagged, hooded, and thrown over the back of a horse. She was told that her family was sending her back to her husband to fulfill her marriage vows before God and produce an heir, a Count Nadash. It was then that Bartoli came to believe that love was just a temporary illusion created by God to heap more suffering upon his children. Looking out now upon this so-called city of the lovers, from the driverless black carriage that raced away from the Théâtre de l'Odéon, Bartoli swore she would one day burn Paris to the ground and stamp her boots upon its ashes. She turned from the small opening in the curtains, shrouding the coach's windows. We must expedite our plan more swiftly. Your trap was ingenious, mistress, a pale-haired companion said, with a hint of worry in her voice. The vampire hunter is now dead, and can never reveal to anyone what he saw in Marseille. A dark woman in white habit, a pretty brow puckered. I knew him, Bartoli replied. He was but one of many. Now the others will come. We shall strike first. Chapter 9. Mina Harker stood on the small balcony and looked out into the night, longing for something, but for what she couldn't say. She shivered at the sound of the chimes ringing from the nearby cathedral, though she was not cold. Above the cathedral, what looked like an unnatural crimson fog was descending from the clouds as if the sky itself were bleeding. The fog moved swiftly toward her, against the wind. Her eyes widened as she stepped back into her husband's study and closed the shutter doors. In a wave of panic, she dashed from window to window, slamming them shut. Mere moments later, an angry wind pounded the glass so forcefully that Mina backed away for fear it would shatter. The howling wind grew louder and louder. Then, in an instant, there was nothing, only a deafening silence. Mina strained to listen for any sound, any movement. Daring at last to peer through the shutters, she saw that the house was enveloped. She couldn't see an inch past the window. A loud, hollow knock on the front door echoed to the high rafters of the foyer, and Mina jumped violently. Another knock came, and then another. The pounding grew louder, more forceful. She did not move. She could not move. She wanted to run, but found herself frozen by the dark fear that it could be him. Return. She knew it was impossible. He was dead. They had all watched him die. There came the sound of glass breaking from the floor below. Mina could hear the front doors swing open and the sound of something being dragged along the marble floor. Jonathan had gone out as usual. Manning, the butler, had been dismissed for the evening. But now someone else, or something, was in the house with her. Mina backed into a corner, cowering in fear. She was angry with herself for being so weak. She would not be a prisoner in her own home to anything or anyone, least of all to herself. Her previous experiences with the supernatural had taught her that shrinking away like a frightened schoolgirl would not force evil to recede. Confronting it head on was the only way to combat the darkness. She snatched a ceremonial Japanese sword from the wall, a gift from one of Jonathan's clients. Ironically, she had always despised the prominent place Jonathan had given it in the room. Nearing the top of the grand staircase, Mina knelt to peer through the banister's ornate iron railings. The front door was wide open. A meandering trail of smeared blood stained the floor from the threshold across the foyer and into the drawing room. The frightful thought that Jonathan had returned home and was somehow injured banished all her fears, and she raced down the stairs and into the drawing room. Following the bloody path to a corner, she found a man huddled beneath the portrait that hid the family walls. A bolt of lightning ripped through the sky, illuminating the study. She gasped, shocked at the ghastly appearance of a man she knew. Jack. Not only was Jack Seward covered from head to foot in blood, but he looked so frail and ill, vastly different from the robust man she had once known. He looked up at her, opened his mouth, and tried to speak. Blood gurgled out instead of words. Dropping the sword, she knelt beside him. Jack, don't try to stop me. I'll fetch a physician. As she rose, Seward grabbed her arm. He shook his head vigorously. He pointed to the floor, where he had written with his own blood, B-E-W-A-R. Beware, Mina implored. Beware of what? Of whom? Seward screamed, but was abruptly silenced. He fell back, his face frozen in horror. Jack Seward was dead. Her own screams woke Mina from the nightmare. She was safe in her own chambers, in her own bed, tangled in the sheets. In those few disoriented seconds between the dream state and the reality, Mina was certain that she saw the crimson fog seep out of her bedroom window and into the night. Though she was sure that she felt a presence in her room, she dismissed it as the last dissipating fragment of her vision. She sighed and dropped back into her pillow, watching the curtains billow in the wind. She had shut the window before retiring to bed. She vividly remembered the bus came up. The cathedral bells rang, and Mina glanced at the clock resting on the mantelpiece. It was 12:15. She ran to the window and reached to grab the latchkey. She froze. The crimson-red fog was in her front courtyard, slithering around the hedges and trees as it retreated from the house. After drawing the curtains, Mina raced down the hall to Jonathan's bedroom to find comfort in her husband's arms, but was disheartened to find his room empty. The bed sheets had not even been turned back. He had not yet come home. Damn him, Mina cursed. He was supposed to have been on the 6:31 train from Paddington, arriving at St. David's Station by 10:05. She looked back into the night, wondering if she should ring up Mark at the half moon down the lane to see if Jonathan had stumbled in from the station. Then she remembered the embarrassing incident from the last time when Jonathan had traded blows with a fellow drunkard over the favours of an aged consumptive poor. Mina had been forced to endure the shame of travelling into town to bail her husband out of the police station cells. Despite that dreadful incident, she still wished Jonathan were here. He was rarely home at late. Now that her son Quincy was away at the Sorbonne, Mina often found herself alone in this grand, empty house. Tonight, her loneliness was poignant, and the house was like a tomb. She gazed at the row of framed photographs on the mantelpiece. What had happened to all those people? Some were deceased, but most had simply drifted away. How did my whole life crash on the rocks? Mina's eye fell upon one of her favorite photographs, and she picked it up. A portrait of Lucy herself, taken before the darkness came into their lives, before she made her fateful choice. The naivety of youthful innocence in those smiles comforted her. She could still clearly remember that beautiful August day in 1885 when she had first met the love of her life, Jonathan Harker, at the Exeter Summer Fair. Lucy had looked radiant in her new Parisian garden dress. She had waited for months to show it off. Mina was fortunate enough to fit into the dress that Lucy had worn 2 summers before, though she found it stifling. She did not quite have Lucy's 18-inch waist, and the corset made her feel as if her breasts were being pressed up to her chin. The revealing décolleté was much more Lucy's style, though it made Mina feel uncomfortable. She couldn't help but enjoy the looks it was attracting from the young men as they passed by. Lucy was trying to introduce Mina to some guests from London, most notably Arthur Fraser Walton, whose family had owned and operated the Times newspaper for the past century. As they were searching for the Walter family, Lucy had suddenly found herself swarmed upon by a bevy of dashing young suitors, asking to be included on her dance card for the evening ball. With her silvery giggle and a false sincerity, Lucy certainly knew how to play the part well. If they only knew her the way Mina knew her. Mina believed God had marked Lucy with red flaming hair as a beacon, warning men to beware of her insatiable nature. Our society would perish if we do not make the necessary social improvements quickly, said a male voice in the line. She turned to see a young man with a mop of disheveled black hair, dressed in a rumpled woolen suit, shaking a handful of loose pages in front of Lord Henry Stafford Norton. The staunch lord, Exeter's Member of Parliament for the House of Commons, seemed to be as wary of the energetic young man as he would a growling dog. Workhouses are not the answer, the young man continued. Many destitute children live by stealing or worse. Something has to be done about the education system to preserve both morality and law and order. Mr. Harker, Lord Northcott sniffed. The Education Act was made it compulsory for children between the ages of 5 and 13 to attend the school. But it costs 9 pence per week per child. Many families cannot afford such a sum. There are means for the children to earn money. Yes, by working in a factory, which is basically indentured slavery for 18-hour days, leaving precious little time for school or studies. Is it any wonder that our impoverished youth turn to thievery or prostitution? Lord Northcott raised a shocked eyebrow at Harker, who pressed on. They are not as fortunate as you, who have been born into wealth. You would have them sell themselves to afford what was handed to you by God. How dare you? Mr. Harker is obviously a man of passion, Nina interrupted. He squeezed young Harker's arm to ensure he didn't speak out of turn. What I'm certain Mr. Harker meant to say was, imagine if you had been unable to read or write. You would have never have attended Oxford, and never have been assigned to the Foreign Office, and could never have held your elected position. A free education for our children will be a great investment in the future, giving them all a chance to improve themselves and the world around them. Every parent wishes the best for his children. It is through them that we achieve immortality. Would you not agree, Lordship? How could I disagree with such wisdom? Lord Northcott said, chuckling. But really, Miss Murray, a woman as attractive as yourself is wasting her time by filling her mind with such a weighty matter. You would do better following the fine example set by your friend, Miss Westmeader, and spend your time searching for a decent husband. Without allowing young Harker a chance to say another word, Lord Northcott offered his elbow to his demure wife, and the two drifted into the crowd. Harker turned to me with a look of bemused awe. I thank you for trying. I couldn't have said it any better myself. These fools refuse to see the light of it. I was trying to impress upon Lord Northcott the imperative to introduce legislation in the House of Lords to follow the example that the United States of America began in 1839 with a free common education. If we fail in this challenge, our society will be left behind. We will not be able to compete in this new industrial age of scientific discovery. Mark my words. Nina smiled. With your knowledge of the law, I would wager that you are either an aspiring politician or a solicitor. Actually, I'm merely a clerk at Mr. Peter Hawkins' firm. I've been trying to impress one of the associates, Mr. Renfield, to take the case of two 13-year-old girls arrested for prostitution. Pro bono, of course. Unless I can make it a bigger case, more newsworthy, perhaps backed by new legislation, I doubt I shall have much luck. And 2 more young souls will be lost. Nina was impressed by the young man's passion. She remembered an old Jewish proverb, which she had always held dear, even though she could not recall where she had come across it. He who saves one soul saves the world entire. And here was a man trying to save 2. Have you read the work of William Magi in the Daily Telegraph? He seems to think as you do. He could be a valuable ally in the cause. Miss Murray, is it possible that you are related to William Murray? I've been trying to reach him for some weeks now, but no one seems to know him. Any time when I've stopped by his office, he's never at his coffee desk. He's a bit of a mystery. If I could meet him, I would be only too glad to shake his hand in thanks for bringing these social issues to the printed page. Nina extended her hand. Harker's confused look slowly transformed into a surprised smile. You're William Murray. Wilhelmina. My friends call me Nina. Jonathan Parker. He took me in his gloved hand and pumped it like a man, forgetting his manners in his astonishment. It is certainly a pleasure to meet you, Miss Murray. Please, call me Nina. He looked into her eyes, The look of respect she found there made Mina believe that this was a man she could easily love. Years later, Jonathan told Mina that that had been the moment he had fallen in love with her. Do you dance, Mr. Hart? No, Jonathan said quickly. I'm afraid that I'm not much of a dancer. He's shy, Mina thought. Good. I would much rather talk about saving two young girls from the horrors of the street. Would you care to join me for a cup of tea? I would be delighted. Most men would have refused Mina's bold offer. Jonathan's eagerness to join her made her love him even more. Mina was unable to fall back to sleep after her macabre vision of Jack's suit. She pulled on a matronly floor-length woolen dress and went to the sitting room to take an early breakfast. The servants returned at sunrise and brought her a pot of tea. She stared at her reflection in the silver service tray. Bags of sleeplessness did not even form under her restless eyes. A philosopher Mina had once read, though she could not recall his name, said, "The shadows man casts in the morning return to haunt him in the evening." For Mina, the past seemed to shroud her life in eternal darkness. In soirees in recent years, Mina had heard countless remarks that she must possess a portrait of herself that was aging in the attic, just like Dorian Gray in Mr. Wilde's risque story published in Lippincott's magazine. For Jonathan, it was no laughing matter, but rather a constant reminder of her betrayal. She could see how he loathed looking at her now, though she tried to please him by dressing more maturely than she appeared. Even in the most spinsterish of clothing, her youthful appearance glowed through. Jonathan was now 50 years of age, but looked 10 years old. She understood how he suffered and why he drank. She could never know the true extent of the horror he'd sustained while imprisoned in the castle all those years ago. On occasions, she had heard him cry out in his sleep that he would not share his nightmares. Could it be that he still did not trust her? Jonathan avoided being home with her whenever possible, but this absence was worse than usual. Never had he been away for so many days without leaving word of where he had gone. Manning placed the morning editions of the Daily Telegraph and the Times before her, and she settled in to read. She was thankfully distracted from her horrific night as she read the headline news of a French aviator named Henri Saint, who had set a new world record by flying non-stop from London to Paris in just under 3 hours. Mina marveled at man's boundless ingenuity and wondered how long it would be before a woman's accomplishments adorned the front page of any newspaper. At 10:15, Jonathan stumbled into the room, unshaven, nursing a hangover, and dressed in a grey tweed suit that was as wrinkled as his brow. With a great moan, he collapsed into his chair. "Good morning, Jonathan." With bloodshot eyes, he tried to focus on his wife. "Good morning, Mina." It was as cordial as usual, which in its own way was more heartbreaking than anger. Manning returned to the room, unobtrusively placed a fresh pot of tea and a basket of fresh bread on the side table, and shut the door silently behind him. Over the years in which he had worked for the Harkers, he'd grown accustomed to their troubled manners and could sense their subtle stresses. The sound of the door closing made Jonathan wince. He tried to steady himself on the chair. "Are you still inebriated?" Jonathan looked up at Mina, as if surprised that she was still there. He reached for the tea. "God, I hope so." "Where did you spend this last night? In an alley? Or with one of your companions?" "It was not in an alley, that I can assure you," he said, boring instead. "Why have you become so cruel?" Jonathan raised his cup, as if in a toast. "The world is cruel, my dear. I'm merely a reflection of it." He was mocking her and the youthful reflection she cast on him. "Then reflect upon this," Mina said, gathering her resolve. Our marriage may not be all we had hoped. We may even sleep in separate bedchambers. But sometimes I do still need you here. You forget, Mrs. Harper, that I needed you once. Mina bit her bottom lip. I had visions again. Dreams of him. He reached for the times. These are not dreams. They're different. I believe you want to have these dreams, Mina. But deep inside, you still desire him. You hold for him a passion I could never fulfill. Passion. Reeling with rage, Mina straightened her back like a cobra ready to strike. Now, wait a moment. Why? He interrupted. Why must he always come between us, Mina? Invading our marriage like a cancer. It is you, Jonathan, not I, who puts in between us. I chose you. Jonathan slowly turned and looked at her with such longing that she thought for the first time he had actually listened to her words. Oh, my dear, dear Mina. Still as beautiful and young as the day I first met you. Is that why you still call his name in the night? Because you love me so much? Mina's heart sank. How long will you continue to punish me for my mistakes? I was only a foolish young girl. I could not see the monster behind the mask. What did he do to you? While I grow old, you... He gestured to her youthful body, shook his head in despair, and gulped his tea. Passion, fire, and concern for others had all been drowned in gallons of whiskey. The man she looked at now killed her husband, the love of her life. She detested this wretch before her. There was no resemblance in him to the man she had fallen in love with. If that was the game he would play, so be it. Locking her emotions behind a bland mask of politeness, Nina sat down and forced her attention back to her newspaper. A small headline in the Daily Telegraph's society page caught her eye. Former head of Whitby Asylum, dead in Paris. Horrified, she scanned the first paragraph. Jack Sullivan is dead. What are you clamoring on about now? My vision last night. Jack's dead, Nina cried. She slapped the newspaper onto the table in front of her husband. This is no coincidence. A light appeared in Jonathan's eyes as he struggled to repress his alcoholic days. Seeming almost lucid, he said, God rest his troubled soul. He bent his head to read the entire article. And he looked up again, an unspoken question hung between them. As he returned for revenge. Jonathan sat for a moment in silence, as if making a decision. Then his shoulders slouched, and his mind fell back into the void. He handed the paper. Here it was an accident. He tapped his finger on the line, emphasis. Fury ignited. You withered into a blind, drunken old fool, Jonathan. The moment she said it, she regretted it. She was trying to spark into action.
Dracula and
The
Undead.
severity only wounded this fragile man.